And good morning and afternoon to everyone that has joined us so far. We're going to give it about a minute before we jump into the content today. So if you are here to learn about solar and storage in the context of multifamily affordable housing, you are in the right place. As I said, we're going to hold for about a minute before we get started today. In addition, for those that have already joined, if you have questions at any point in the webinar, please do use the chat box for that function. We'll also have a Q&A at the end if you want to verbally ask a question. Either way is fine with us. But for those of you that like to use that chat box, we encourage you to do so as the thoughts cross your mind. In addition, for those of you just joining, again, this meeting is being recorded. The slides and the presentation as a package will be available once the webinar is finalized. You'll get an email from us when that webinar recording is available, so you can share it with those individuals that were not able to join today. So you're hearing from Jeff Cook. I'm from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I'm going to navigate you through this webinar today. I am also one of the project leads from NREL on the Multifamily Affordable Housing Collaborative within the National Community Solar Partnership, and we are the ones that have orchestrated this technical webinar with you all today. I welcome those of you that have not been a part of the collaborative before, and I also welcome back everyone that's been a part of our effort here for the past 18 months. For those of you that are not aware, the National Community Solar Partnership Multifamily Affordable Housing Collaborative was designed to identify pathways to increase solar access to low and moderate income residents that typically reside or frequently reside in this type of housing. They have a unique opportunity to benefit from solar and storage, as you all know, but ultimately there's a variety of barriers that are precluding them from the ability to adopt or benefit from solar and storage, whether that is utility allowances not allowing tenants to directly benefit versus the affordable housing provider having difficulties finding financing or acceptable roof space to be able to install solar projects and then ultimately deliver any sort of benefits to their members or residents. So the collaborative was designed to develop a variety of resources, a toolkit, so to speak, to help multifamily providers, housing providers, to be able to identify new and innovative ways to serve low and moderate income communities with solar. And so that's the impetus of the collaborative. And how has the collaborative sought to do this? We provided technical assistance to a variety of members, including many on this call, to be able to identify what are the key challenges and barriers. We've subsequently developed a variety of resources from the Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, Urban Ingenuity, and of course NREL, along with a variety of other partners, have helped develop resources that we'll be announcing and publishing over the span of the next few months into the next fiscal or calendar year. And that will all be published in our final toolkit. And so everyone that's on this call will benefit, including from this technical webinar, of course, as one of the key action items of our collaborative. For those of you involved with the collaborative, I wanted to make you aware of a couple of upcoming events. First and foremost, for everyone, the National Community Solar Partnership is having its annual Partner Summit, the second annual summit, on January 25th of this coming year. So we encourage you to hold that date for that session, and we'll be providing more information about that going forward. We're also going to plan a peer exchange discussion with our collaborative members in February. More information to come on that. And then ultimately for the collaborative, we'll have an additional meeting in March where we'll be discussing next steps for the collaborative at that point in time. Of course, the collaborative, though it is coming to an end in terms of our direct engagement on a monthly basis, we encourage you all to stay involved in the partnership, and you can participate by getting direct technical assistance, in particular through the NCSP website, and that's listed here. Ultimately, I'm going to mute everybody as well for this session.
I think you muted yourself there.
I did. Thank you for that. And so I muted everyone, and when it's our panelist time, I will unmute you all, and so we can jump right in. But as I was saying, for those that want to get involved with the National Community Solar Partnership, you can do so by our technical assistance pathway. All right, so the agenda for the call today, you'll see it here, that I'll be introducing our discussion today with some NREL resources. We'll then have the Clean Energy Group, then the Boulder Housing Partners, and finally Sunrun discuss various topics as outlined here. So in short, Abby and Marielle are going to discuss the overall lessons learned from some of the great reports they have done in relation to storage markets for multifamily affordable housing. Tim Beal, of course, from Boulder Housing is going to walk us through a particular project that they have done. And then finally, Scott Sarum from Sunrun will help us to understand how we can take some of the first steps as affordable housing providers and what to expect, and also provide a little bit more on the ground perspective, given Scott and Sunrun are doing a lot of work in this space with multifamily affordable housing providers. So I'm going to talk about NREL's battery storage tools that are available today at no cost to you to use. And so these are initial decision-making tools. They are to help you to understand what's possible. And so we encourage you to use those. And only going to talk about two key ones today, REOPT and SAM, our renewable energy optimization model, and our system advisor model. Of course, there's a variety of other tools at the laboratory that could be beneficial to you when thinking through solar and storage. Ultimately, for REOPT, as many of you in the collaborative already know, this is a free techno-economic optimization model that evaluates what type of solar and storage systems may be cost-effective for your location or may be able to provide the resilience benefits that you want to withstand a particular outage or grid outage. Some of the key questions that REOPT could help answer is what size solar and or storage system would result in the most bill savings. In some areas, energy storage is already cost-effective in that respect. In many others, it may not be based on the current rate structures, and so REOPT can also help consider what type of battery storage or backup power systems would be needed to power critical loads through an outage. It will also provide you a variety of details about the potential benefits of that system, from emissions, of course, to economics. These are all the types of inputs that are incorporated into REOPT. As you can see here, there are economic utility cost considerations as well as technology considerations that are inputted into REOPT, and then we output what systems may be cost effective or which were designed to meet the requirements that you set out in tool. So if anyone needs help to understand how to use REOPT as your first effort, we're happy and waiting to help you with that. Of course, there's also the system advisor model for those of you who are not familiar with that one. This is also software that's incorporated or leverages benefits from REOPT as well. In that tool to be able to do some similar analysis. So ultimately, SAM was the first detailed battery model, and in particular, it incorporates degradation of the battery. As many of you know, as you discharge and use the battery, it degrades over time, so you can't expect to get the same output in charge 1 as you would get in charge 1000 or thereafter. And so that NREL model is important to give you that full lifetime picture for what's able to be done. And so both of those tools are available. You also saw reference to PV Watts, and of course, that's another great product that NREL has developed that can be used by you all to consider any sort of analysis needs in that space and others. And so, like I said, today, I'm just giving a brief overview of those various tools, which again are available for you to use at any point in time. So without further ado here, I'm happy to introduce our first speakers for today from the Clean Energy Group. And so ultimately, they're going to walk us through some of the great research that they have done. Before we do that, I'm going to introduce both of them. So you have Marielle Mingo, and she is from the Clean Energy Group. And so she's a product director there. She's been in that role supporting solar and battery storage development in the under-resourced communities in that role. She has 10 years of experience in this space, renewables, efficiency, resilience programs, and the like. She also has a Master's of Science in Environmental Policy and Sustainability Management from the New School. We also have Abby on the line. Abby is a product manager at Clean Energy Group as well. And so she supports similar work in the equitable solar and battery storage space. And she's also been in a variety of other organizations working in the same space. She also holds a master's degree in energy policy from Tufts University. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Abby and Marielle to discuss their work.
Thanks so much, Jeff. We're so happy to be here today. I apologize for not having my video on. I just got a notification that my network quality isn't great. So do let me know if I break up or you can't hear me. But yeah, my name's Abby Ramanan. I'm a project manager with Clean Energy Group. To give you all a bit of background, for those of you who aren't familiar with Clean Energy Group, we are a national nonprofit based in Montpelier, Vermont, but we're kind of scattered all over the place. We're funded primarily by private foundations. Actually, Jeff, could you go to the next slide? Thanks. And so several of those private foundations are listed here. And we also do have a sister organization, the Clean Energy States Alliance, and that is a membership organization of state energy agencies that manage clean energy funds around the country. Next slide, please. And so one of CEG's biggest projects is the Resilient Power Project. This was developed about 8 years ago in the wake of Superstorm Sandy with the goal of enabling access to resilient power technologies for under-resourced communities. And resilient power technologies for us mostly means solar and battery storage. This work is kind of a reflection of the fact that most underserved communities are the ones hardest hit by widespread power outages in the wake of serious climate events. They're also often the most energy burdened. So through this work, we put out a variety of resources, including the report that we're going to talk about today, as well as the ones that you see listed here. We also send out several webinars, and you can find information about all of that at resilientpower.org as well as cleanegroup.org. Next slide, please. And so this slide shows some of the projects that we've supported either through in-house analysis or small technical assistance grants that we provide that can cover the cost of pre-development feasibility analyses. Mari is going to talk about that technical assistance program in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation, so I won't go into too much detail, but you can just see some of the projects listed here, and this map's also on our website if you want to learn more details about specific projects. Next slide, please. So a lot of what we'll discuss today is based on a report produced by myself and Marielle, based on work originally funded by a DOE grant that's managed by our sister organization, the Clean Energy States Alliance. The impetus for this report was really brought on by work that we've done with critical service providers serving disadvantaged communities, including multifamily affordable housing developers. Again, a lot of that through our technical assistance program, and just working with them to implement solar and storage for several years. It's well documented. I'm sure you all know that solar and storage can really improve economic and resiliency outcomes for low income and otherwise disadvantaged communities. But despite these benefits, we really weren't seeing a lot of penetration of solar and storage in this market. And so to get into the reasons behind this lack of implementation, we surveyed a group of about 60 critical service providers representing community service organizations, affordable housing developers, municipalities, emergency service providers, and other groups that operate in low-income areas to kind of ask about what barriers they were encountering when they were trying to implement solar and storage projects. Next slide. So just to kind of give you a sense of the geography of the respondents, most of the respondents were from California and Massachusetts, which, if you know the regulatory space in those areas, makes a lot of sense since there's really fairly strong incentives for solar and storage implementation in those states. But there was actually fairly good geographic diversity overall, which also speaks to, sometimes regulatory incentives aren't always the #1 factor in the feasibility of a project. I think, for example, the fact that Puerto Rico has had 6 projects who responded, actually the 3rd highest area after Massachusetts and California who had projects in this responding to this survey, is a good example of the role that resilience can play in motivating folks in implementing a project. Next slide. And so leading into that, one of the major trends we noticed that we'll touch on a little bit is the difference in responses between affordable housing providers and more like nonprofit community service providers or community service organizations. And one example of this is the difference in motivations. So this graph is a little confusing, but essentially we asked respondents to rank each of the 5 choices you see here on a screen from 5, which was most important, to 1, which was least important. And as you'll see, affordable housing providers ranked electric bill cost savings as their #1 concern, while community service providers ranked resilience and producing clean energy as their top concerns, then followed by bill savings. I'm sure a lot of the affordable housing developers in the audience probably agree with this. You know, when you're a developer, particularly one with a fairly large portfolio, often having to justify the economic case for solar and storage is just going to be more important in getting a project done or getting it approved. So there's often some constraints there that are good to keep in mind when you're developing either, you know, policy or program support for that population in particular. Next slide. And here I will, yeah, actually, this is also me. So another key, kind of going back into that discussion of the difference between affordable housing developers and community service providers. Again, the revenue generation was a major motivation for affordable housing developers. So this just kind of shows you the difference in percentages between those two of who ranked revenue generation as one of their top motivations. So again, you know, when you are having to justify an economic case more so than, say, a nonprofit small community service organization who might just have the kind of, you know, the goal of just producing clean energy in their community, and might not have to worry about the economic case quite so much, or might just have a different economic calculus. If they're a nonprofit, you know, they might have different funding streams that might just change the feasibility of a solar and storage project for them. Next slide. And now I will hand it over to my colleague, Marielle Mango. Oh, Maria, I think you're muted.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marielle Mango. I'm a project director at Clean Energy Group. I'm just going to touch upon a little bit on the barriers that were selected in the survey that Abby discussed. Quite a mixed bag here, but pretty overwhelming response in terms of a barrier being that they have encountered or they expect to encounter a lack of information about battery storage. A lot of community organizations and smaller affordable housing providers just did not know where to start in terms of understanding battery storage. They typically had a little bit more background on solar and how solar can benefit a facility, but didn't quite understand how battery storage plays into that, costs associated with it, things like that. Number 2, which was very, very closely almost tied with lack of information, was technical issues. So a lot of folks really just did not understand, how do I take the first step? Who do I call about battery storage? Do all solar developers provide battery storage? How do I get rocking on this? What are the costs? What depends on it? How much backup power can I get out of a system? Really just kind of these nitty-gritty overall stats on how solar and storage can benefit their facility and how they go about doing it that just was not available to them. Some of the other ones that, as you go down, you know, permitting and interconnection issues, that was a huge issue, primarily for affordable housing developers. And I think the reason for that is they had just experienced more battery storage projects. A lot of the community institutions that replied to this had not yet completed one or started the process. So I don't think permitting and interconnection issues had quite come up yet. And then closely followed was financing options and economics. So those, I think, pretty much go hand in hand in terms of, if you can't pay for this out of pocket, how am I supposed to pay for it? What's a non-predatory lending service? How do I include this in a capital stack specifically for affordable housing providers? And how much does economic feasibility, how much wiggle room is there? Because you're finding that some, especially foundations, look at the value of resilience beyond kind of energy bill savings and look to health and business continuity plans, things like that. But those are very difficult to value and less tangible. So it's hard to really figure out what is the economics of solar and storage beyond these numbers we can really pull out. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to highlight again the difference between barriers. The prior slide was a nice overview of kind of everyone's responses. These were the differences. We saw kind of across the board that there actually weren't a ton of differences in the barriers. Permitting an interconnection was a problem, as I had aforementioned, regarding really more of an issue for affordable housing providers, and lack of information about battery storage. So you see a lot of these issues going back and forth. Fire safety was an interesting one. Affordable housing providers were much more concerned, and I think a lot of that had to do with kind of the obvious that folks live in affordable housing. So oftentimes when they're trying to install solar and storage, you have a lot more issues with the fire department, fire code, different municipalities, rules and regulations around what can you use battery storage for and what do you have to use typical fossil fuel fired generation sources for. Next slide. So our report kind of used this smaller survey to come up with a couple recommendations that we could see for how do we really improve the market for solar and storage development in underserved communities. And these were a couple that we wanted to pull out. Pretty obvious: increasing battery storage awareness, create opportunities for capacity building for actual organizations and affordable housing providers, technical support, innovative incentive and finance options. And really the tagline there is, how do we value resilience and who is getting to be able to contribute to this clean energy movement, right? So we should be offering incentives for battery storage to everyone, but those incentives should have larger carve-outs for facilities that provide support to low income or BIPOC communities. They should have carve-outs for smaller community institutions that might not have the capacity to do huge grant applications like an affordable housing developer or a larger regional nonprofit. And what does finance look like, right? Especially for smaller nonprofit organizations, predatory financing has been a huge issue just really since the beginning of finance for these communities. And how do we ensure that they're able to access a financing opportunity that they understand, that's easy to utilize, and that doesn't prey on the interest they have to make their communities more resilient? And lastly, we've touched upon this a little bit, the monetary value for resilience. This is a tough one. I know NREL's done a lot of work in this space. Really, we need to start putting together a dollar amount that comes with what is the value of having resilient backup power beyond utility bill savings. I know that Boulder Housing has done some really great work in terms of understanding their own continuity of business plan and how much money they save by just being able to stay open and operational, which is a really great step in the right direction. So more projects like that, having more financial institutions understand how that monetary value works and being able to incorporate it into finance and payback options. Next slide. And I just wanted to finish up with a featured recommendation, which is technical assistance. As we've kind of reiterated throughout this presentation, technical assistance was a major problem across the board, both for affordable housing providers and critical community facilities, just in terms of how do they get their foot in the door. So we really need to be creating more opportunities for technical assistance, pre-development feasibility analysis opportunities, making sure there's a trusted third-party source to come and ask questions to. These organizations really need a clear picture of costs, ownership structures, and financial incentives. How much is a system going to cost? What kind of backup power is it going to provide? Things like that in order to actually make the move forward to actually completing the project. And one of those that we highlighted here is Clean Energy Group's Technical Assistance Fund, which is on the next slide. And this is something we offer through CEG, where we do grants from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on the scope of the project. And basically, these grants let community organizations and affordable housing providers serving underserved communities a little bit of financial support to be able to get their foot in the door. What does a feasibility assessment look like? How is our system going to support our operations? How much battery power, what's the length of duration of backup power we'll get through this battery? What are the costs? What are the incentives? What are the economics? We have seen that this is a huge spur, a catalyst to developing solar and storage resources in low-income and BIPOC-led communities, because once they have the report, they can either keep moving forward with finance, keep moving forward with fundraising, or be able to use that to actually have a tangible piece of documentation to say, this is what my community needs, and now I need to figure out how to do next steps for it. So I wanted to highlight this. If you're interested in the Clean Energy Group's Technical Assistance Fund or in this report, our website has a lot of information, and I encourage anyone to reach out to to me or Abby. In terms of our specific technical assistance program, it is a rolling fund that's offered all year, and we've supported well over 300 projects, 40 plus of which have already been completed, many of which are underway, and it's incredibly important that we get these projects moving and off the ground, and we want to provide support in any way we can. So there's our information, and thank you so much for having us.
Thanks so much to you, Marielle, for discussing that great information and offering technical assistance to this group. As you and I know, it's very important, and we're excited that that opportunity exists for everybody here. Now I want to introduce our next speaker today. It's Tim Beal. He's from Boulder Housing Partners. He's been there for over 20 years. He's the Director of Sustainable Communities, and he does everything you would suspect a director would do. So focusing on energy, water, waste, climate justice, equity, social justice is all incorporated into his job title and his work. So he's a very busy person, and we're happy to have him on the call today to talk with us. For those of you, again, that have joined us a bit late, just wanted to confirm we are recording this webinar. And then in addition, if you have questions, please do put them in the chat. We'd also encourage everyone that's here, if you've ever done or are considering a solar and storage project, we'd love for you to throw that information in the chat. So if you are considering storage right now or working with somebody or would like to even, just put that in the chat for us to know. Without further ado, Tim, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Tim Beal from Boulder Housing Partners, as Jeff mentioned. I'd like to start with this slide. It's always a good reminder to me that we are working for our residents in these communities. So pictures of people is always a good reminder to me of what we do. Next slide. So we're the housing authority for the city of Boulder, and because we're Boulder, we changed our name to a more friendly name. But here's just a few assorted facts. We serve over 3,000 folks in the city of Boulder. We've got now 1,600 units across 40 housing communities that range in size from 10 units to a couple hundred units. About 30% of our communities, properties now have community space, which I added that because I'll come back to that later in the presentation. And then in terms of solar, we have a goal of trying to get to net zero. And right now we're almost 40% of the way in terms of our meeting our electric demand through solar. Next slide. So this project was really focused on our main office building, which is pictured there. You can go to next slide. So that office space is a 1,700 square foot building and houses our main administrative offices and our maintenance facility. And the challenge, as stated here, powering critical services during an outage, and just struck by the clean energy presentation. We are always kind of straddling that. We are affordable housing provider, but we also are in the community, provide a lot of community services. So how do we do all that and wrestle with that? So this project was really spurred by the availability of funds through the READY grant process, which the city of Boulder had applied for. We were kind of a sub-applicant in that process, and that was spurred by our experience through the 2013 floods, which were quite devastating to the city of Boulder, and really put a stress on our services, but all critical services in the community. So you go to next slide. So we put our heads together with the city of Boulder, who's a great partner, of how could we help provide services during an outage, and then what might that look like, and then where would we start? So we came up with a project idea focused on our main offices, because we've thought, that's kind of the hub of what we do, and we could support residents, kind of we felt, in the best way by by being a kind of a stable element if we hit another crisis. So that was our idea. We pieced together, we've got solar, we've got battery backup, all on our main office. And you go to the next slide, please. So this project includes solar, battery backup, and then we added another element really through the foresight of, we work with a group called Independent Power Systems, and they had done a lot of off-grid work, ironically, especially in Montana with some of these super trophy ranches. And so they had a lot of experience with battery backup, that sort of thing. So they helped us kind of envision a system that has battery backup, but also has a small gas DC generator that would back up the batteries if we had long outages. So in general, the solar supplies enough power to keep the batteries charged as needed. And so this little DC gas generator, one, it's natural gas, it can operate on natural gas or propane, could really help the system operate kind of indefinitely, because we were trying to envision, not only had we experienced floods, we've had some fire issues in the past, but also we, could experience outages during a snowstorm. And at that point, solar, for an extended outage, solar would not be very helpful. So adding this little gas generator allows us to really operate for a very long period of time and any time of the year. So we also got the benefit of adding a couple of EV chargers with the system. And this system is all behind the grid, so it can go into the grid, but the way it's designed, it can shut off of the grid and just supplies our building independently. So next slide. So again, this was all installed we have a little indoor parking area, so we were able to, you'd mentioned fire codes, we had to wrestle with some fire code issues, and it was a little easier to install this outside, but we were able to put it in a protected area in an open garage situation. So so many things that you all mentioned in your previous presentation resonated in this challenge, as well as, kind of lack of expertise. I'm the sustainability guy, and also operationally coming forward with these ideas and selling to the organization. People are kind of like, uh-oh, what's he up to now? What does he want to do? So trying to sell these ideas internally and externally is also a challenge. I think now, that was back in 2017. I think there's much more information and knowledge out there on these issues, but at that time that was a challenge as well. But the way the system works is, if we have a power outage, this system automatically switches over and backs up our critical loads. One of the most important things, really supporting power to our servers, which are kind of the heart of our operations. We are centrally located in our office, but we also have satellite offices around town. So access to information and the servers is really critical. It also keeps the facility going in terms of heating, outlets, phones, Wi-Fi, that sort of thing. And you can go to the next slide. We've had pretty consistently at least one outage per year, and this is the magic switch panel. And just a funny story, when we had our first outage in summer of 2018, when it happened, since we hadn't experienced one, I kind of ran around the building like, is it working? Is it happening? And one of the maintenance guys was just like, yeah, it's working like you told us it would. So it was just kind of one of those moments where you're hoping and praying everything works and that staff believes in what we're doing, and that culture shifted quickly, and thankfully it did work. So that was kind of a fun but nerve-wracking experience. So we also installed some smart controls. So the idea was primarily this was designed around resiliency. You know, how could we operate if there was another outage, you know, another flood, fire, what a snowstorm that would impact our power? Could we keep operating and support our communities? And then secondarily, how could we look at some cost savings for our building? So we were able, through these smart controls, able to reduce costs on our building, I think in the first year of around 10%. It's a pretty simple system that really looks at things like air conditioning and really tries to cycle those air conditioners so they don't come on all at once and create a huge load demand. So that's a simple system. You can go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this project was about half funded by a READY grant, which came through the city of Boulder. We were also able to get a small solar grant from the city of Boulder for the installation of the solar. The rest of the costs were covered by the organization, and just feeling like this is a commitment we wanted to make to one, partner and be a pilot for the city on this type of technology, and then two, you know, really learn about it ourselves so that we could envision the future doing more of this. So at the, you know, the economics of this, you know, and I wanted to point out too that Marielle had actually done a really great case study working with us in the city. And so a lot of this information can be found there. It's much more extensive than this presentation, but the original payback, we were looking in, I think, 21 years, and then we started analyzing, you know, what would it cost if our power went out for even an hour or during the day, you know, cost to operations. We are also looking at energy costs. We were looking at a variety of things, and that cost has come down over the years. Now, kind of our back of the envelope is our payback is probably closer to 15 years than the original 19 or 20 years. And I think in terms of lessons learned, this is a very simple system. We went with an older battery technology because we just felt like at that point, we just didn't know about some of the newer technologies. And since it was really primarily around resiliency, we wanted a system that we knew was tried and true, that we could really depend on. It's been a very easy system to operate and maintain. We haven't had any issues. And then some of the challenge has been around the monitoring, and then just how can we further reduce our power costs at our office. So I think that's it. Happy to take any questions and or future questions if people have them.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tim, and thanks
Sure.
for that discussion of your project. And as I had said to you prior, it's always great when a payback period is faster. Sometimes payback periods are longer than we originally estimated. And so it's exciting to see that that is not the case in this particular example. So again, if folks have questions for Tim, by all means, put them in the chat and we will get to them. Now I'm excited to introduce Scott Sarum from Sunrun. He's the VP for multifamily at that organization, where he focuses, of course, on energy solutions for LMI properties across the United States. He's an expert in this field. He's been there for 13 years, or he's been in this field for 13 years. He's worked and consulted with the Department of Energy. I'm happy to have Scott's support there, and also helped work on California Assembly Bill 693, or at least the run-ups to that. which ultimately became the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing Program, or SOMA, which many of you are already familiar with. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Scott here. And Scott, we've got about 10 minutes. Hopefully we can cover your topic in that 10-minute time. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. So over at Sunrun, we've been doing this, like Jeff said, for about I've personally been doing it for about 13 years. And Sunrun has now made a commitment as being the largest residential solar provider in the United States to provide 500 megawatts of solar on multifamily affordable housing across the United States in the markets where we operate. So we're pretty excited about that. And the reason we're doing it is because we've had some really good experiences to date in California. We've been dealing with what was called the MASH program, the Multifamily Affordable Solar Homes Program in California. There were two separate iterations of that then led into the SOMA program. And that allowed us over time to kind of figure out what were some of the issues important to affordable housing, and also sort of how to approach the split incentive issue of making sure that we're providing a meaningful and direct benefit to tenants while also providing a net operating income boost to the housing sponsor or the owner. But to date, we've been able to, we're working and have developed about 425 projects that touch 30,000 units and ultimately provide benefits to about 100,000 low-income residents in California. And one of the things that we've been able to do is and this was part of AB 693, which is the SOMA program, is really provide a robust job training component. Just last week, we were doing a ribbon cutting up in Northern California, and we had to do job training as part of the program. But one of the benefits was one of the residents that actually lived at the property went through the job training program, and we ended up hiring him at Sunrun, which is really, I think, kind of at the end of this, it's one of the major goals, which is we're pretty proud of. And what have we learned through kind of all of this? As we've been going and doing this for a little while and working with affordable housing owners and developers, we realized that affordable housing owners and developers are in the housing business, and solar and storage are kind of a nice to have. And so what we've been really trying to do is try to press the easy button and make solar and storage as absolutely easy as possible. And that's one of the things we've taken away in working through this space for so long. The other thing is it's really important to kind of have a trusted partner that can guarantee results. We want to make sure that there is a direct economic benefit to and an NOI bump to the property itself, and we're able to do that through providing performance guarantees. And then finally, one of the ways that we're able to do this, and I think actually a lot of folks on this call have been instrumental as well. We've been working closely, in California, we work closely with environmental justice advocates and housing advocates to get AB 693 passed. And federally, we've been working with, again, some environmental justice advocates, housing advocates, and others, and other social justice advocates. And we're able to get what's called the Low-Income Housing Renewable Energy Credit to be placed into the Build Back Better Act. I think it was House Resolution 5183. And what that does is that it provides an additional 20% tax credit. And ultimately, the goal is really to provide additional sources of funding to help close funding gaps, so that either at the beginning of a project, if it's a new construction, or if it's a mid-cycle, wherever it is in the life cycle of affordable housing, that there is money there to help fill funding gaps, so that we can put solar and storage on the various properties. Again, it's super important from our perspective, from Sunrun's perspective, and I'm sure a lot of the folks on the line, that we make sure that there's a direct tenant benefit. And again, we think, and I'd be interested to hear what everybody has to say about this at the end. One of the things that we've learned in working closely with affordable housing owners is it's very difficult to control costs and stabilize housing assets with respect to insurance and utility cost. What solar and storage does is it helps to stabilize the housing asset by creating a predictable utility bill for the property. So moving on to the next. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. If you want to move on to these slides, I'm looking at my slides here. Go right ahead. I'm sorry. If you wouldn't mind, maybe moving, maybe one more would be great. to the next slide. So there's financing options. I'm sure folks understand there's a cash purchase, which a lot of folks will do at the beginning if they're doing new construction or if they're doing a rehab. There's been a 30% investment tax credit that then gets put to be part of the capital stack for a sort of a low-income housing tax credit type deal. And then, but what the problem is on that is that the owner then takes on the operations and maintenance responsibility. Then what we get into the ownership structure of third-party owned, and that's where a company like Sunrun or any other provider or some sort of a financing partner owns the system. And then the housing sponsor is paying for the electricity through a power purchase agreement or some type of a lease. In that situation, that there's sort of a guaranteed NOI bump with a reduction in the utility cost. And the owner of the third-party owned system typically would provide a performance guarantee and provide operations and maintenance for the life of the system, which is typically about 20 years. So go right ahead to the next slide, please. And how we approach it at Sunrun and how we've found this to be successful and why we've actually made the commitment to move and really meaningfully go after the affordable housing market and provide these services is because we provide capital access. Sunrun's been able to raise various funds, through Wall Street, and one of the things that we've done recently is we were able to raise a fund with the fashion brand Chanel, and they wanted to have a fund that's just dedicated to affordable housing, to low to moderate income multifamily affordable housing. So we believe it's the first of its kind that's just dedicated to that. And we are able to utilize that to go ahead and put a lot of solar in California through the SOMA program using this tax equity. The other part of it is by working with these with these various funds, it provides us with flexibility to offer affordable housing specific type of solar service agreements. And because of the experience we've had over the years, we've been able to understand sort of the issues that go along with owning affordable housing and then trying to put solar and storage on the property and get it financed. So for instance, we don't require subordination. There's a lot of outs within the contract to make sure that there's lender and investor approval. There's a lot of things in there that are associated with very, very specific affordable housing type issues that we're able to put in. And that's one of the reasons that we've been able to be successful in offering what we've been doing over the years through this solar service agreement. And it really is, at the end of the day, it's a very low risk. And that's what I think hopefully a lot of the folks on the phone are looking for, is something to be able to provide resilience, to provide electrification, to be able to provide some sort of understanding of exactly what your utility expenses are going to be so that you can stabilize your asset. So we're trying to minimize that risk even further by taking on all the finance, design, permitting, construction, and O&M. So in essence, we put on the solar, we finance the solar, we create the financing mechanism, and really try to minimize the impact, not only for the folks that live there where we're doing the construction, but also the owners who are trying to stabilize the asset. So moving on to the next slide. And the way we do this is there's about 3 different ways right now. And if you're dealing with a master metered project, which are typically older projects, we're able to just provide, if there's net metering allowed at the property, we're able to basically just provide a straight discount to the electricity through master metered. And that's just, sort of a bi-directional meter if everybody's sort of familiar with it. And then the other way is which is what we've done in California, is we are looking at virtual net metering, and that allows us to provide a direct tenant benefit. What we're doing is we're putting in essence, a giant solar farm on the roof or on parking canopies, but on the campus of the affordable housing development. And it allows us to produce a significant amount of energy through a net generator output meter, and then allocate the savings by a percentage each month to each of the meters. And we're working on doing that same type of solution through community solar as well. And go ahead and moving on to the next slide. So, today what we're doing is, we're working toward electrification. We're working toward resiliency. Sunrun's starting to provide, we've mostly have been doing solar on affordable housing, but now we're trying to do solar and storage depending on what the situation is. In California, it really is about load shifting, making sure that we are helping to avoid the higher time of use rates that the utilities have been successful in putting in place. In New Jersey, it's more about demand shaving and grid services. And in Hawaii, we're dealing with self-consumption. But ultimately, we're trying to work toward getting more resiliency into affordable housing, and we're finding better ways and more ways to be able to finance it and integrate it into the total system. This moves us into tomorrow, which I think is also super exciting with the Build Back Better Act coming online. And some of the tax credits getting extended and created. There will be opportunities to have electrical vehicle charging sited over at affordable housing properties. As everybody knows, a lot of the building codes are moving toward electrification, so we'll be able to manage the utility loads and be able to reduce carbon emissions through electrification. And one of the things that we do also is make sure that every time we design something, that energy efficiency is at the top of the list, so that we make sure that before we're building these large solar arrays and putting in a battery, that we've made sure that that the property has become, or at least understands what it needs to do to become more energy efficient. So, and at the end of the day, for us, the basics apply. We want to have low risk. We're looking at low risk, smooth execution, financial benefit for the owners, and really focusing on filling a funding gap so that we can, do something today. We want to make sure that everybody understands that the operations and maintenance responsibility with solar, it's a 20 to 25 year asset, is important. If you own it, you need to make sure that you're reserving funds for it. If you don't own it, then you can make sure that whoever your third party provider is doing, has reserve funds and has a program to make sure that your performance is being guaranteed and your savings are being guaranteed. And I think that from our perspective, that's about it. And happy to field any questions.
Thanks so much, Scott. And yeah, great discussion there. And certainly a space that we're all moving forward to, especially at the lab, is how do we expand clean energy products and technologies beyond just those we talked about today for a holistic, comprehensive solution, which of course is critical to the lab as well. So thanks to all of the speakers today. We've had a great discussion, and I've asked folks to put information or questions into the chat, which they have done. I wanted to make Tim, you aware there's a new question in there regarding communications, and then Scott, there's a question for you too. But before we introduce and discuss those questions, perfect, Tim's already in there engaging. But perfect, for the group here, I was wanting to hear from one other partner in the collaborative who's done some work in the solar and storage space as well to provide a little perspective, and that's Darian over at Winco. Darian, I believe you're there. Do you want to chime in with your perspective on your process for solar and storage, what you've learned so far?
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Great. Sorry I was late. I was double booked. Scott at Sunrun, great presentation. We're actually working with Sunrun in California, 3 properties, hopefully more out there, and then also hopefully in Massachusetts, and integrating storage into that work as well. So wind companies, we haven't actually installed a storage system in our properties. That's going to change, but if you don't know, I don't know who's on the call here, but we manage quite a few properties, mostly affordable housing, affordable multifamily, We have been selected by the Department of Energy to basically pilot what grid interactive efficient buildings means for affordable housing. So that's solar and storage, but also other technology to manage the load of a building in cooperation with the controller on the battery storage device to basically make these buildings, which are, you know, standard kind of existing affordable housing properties, really grid assets. And so to do that, we're just at the starting line of a multi-year program, and looking forward to, you know, somewhere between 6 and 20 properties in Massachusetts pilot not just the technology and how to, you know, physically control the different loads and the different technologies, but really how to pay for it. You know, what does a business model look like? 20 years ago, you know, solar PV was barely just getting started in a commercial space with PPAs. We did our first power purchase agreement in 2005, and it was literally one of the first in Massachusetts. And so our vision really is defining what the GEBS kind of business model looks like, so that 5 years from now, or maybe sooner than that, there are providers out there in the marketplace looking not just at solar and storage, but really solar and storage and other technologies combined to manage building loads and the interaction between those building loads and the technology and the grid, and mapping out the different revenue streams needed to make that effective and make it possible. And all the while, this is affordable housing, and we're emphasizing resiliency and really trying to define what resiliency as a service means for affordable housing. So there's quite a bit more to this program, but wanted to just quickly introduce that for everyone, and happy to field questions. And again, sorry I was a bit late.
Oh, no problem. And great to have you, Darian, and to speak to that work that you're doing, which of course is critical for us to evaluate how to maximize value for these products to the grid and then also the market itself. I also noticed Jackie over at Mercy and then Ryan over at National Housing Trust also are considering or moving storage projects forward as well. So that's exciting. And Scott, I was curious if you wanted to speak at all to Kelsey's question there, or if we should take that one offline about procuring and financing for those publicly funded projects, and what lessons learned or thoughts you have in that space.
Yeah, so in that, first of all, in California, we worked closely with HUD to be able to get basically get HUD not to count the tenant benefit as something that would take away from HUD subsidy for owners. So that's one experience that we've had that's been very positive, and then that has opened up the housing authority market in California. One of the other things we deal with is when we're talking to various public housing authorities is coming up with a request for qualification and then helping with RFPs to be able to help. And so in essence, we're kind of providing a technical assistance. And then to the extent there are other developers out there that have the expertise that say a Sunrun has, then it would open it up to bidding, but it would show kind of what the basics are that would be required. And so we typically have done it through a request for qualification. We become qualified. And then as the various projects come along in the public environment, if you're qualified, then it kind of helps improve the speed of the process and makes it fair to everybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Scott. And we are close to time here, so I'm going to have to move us to the wrap-up component of this project. But for those of you that still had questions that were not answered today, please do get those in the chat before you leave, and we can make sure to follow up on those with you directly. So once again, I wanted to thank everyone, all of our panelists today, for their perspective, all of those that have joined us and been engaged throughout. Appreciate all of you. I'd also like to thank once more Tawe, who's here as well. He's part of our core team over at SAFE, and as many of you know, he's been working with you all in our peer learnings. And Tawe will be leaving our group here, so we want to give him one more round of applause with everyone. Thank you so much, Tawe, for your time and effort in the work that you've done here. We will certainly miss you, but you will still be in the market and in this space, so we'll be working with you in the future. For everybody else, of course, the collaborative continues on, and we'll have a variety of great research and reports for you upcoming, including our summit in January. So we encourage you all to attend then. In between then, have a happy holidays. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for putting it on, Jeff.